The and I did make you co-host if you wanted to share slides or anything else, Danielle.
Yeah,
So
sure.
um, Danielle is passionate about branding, about storytelling, which resonates with me because that is a core of what I do with my clients. I teach them the hero story for how to introduce yourself. I teach them how to give powerful accomplishment stories. So Danielle came and did a presentation for the Beacon networking group I'm in, and I said, this stuff is powerful, and we need to hear more of this. So she has her own brand strategy and communications company, and she's going to show us how to develop a powerful brand narrative and share it with prospects and clients so that you can connect with more impact and be much more successful in building your business. So without further ado, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So yes, I can, when my kids ask me what I do, I always say I'm a storyteller. I got my start in the chemical industry, which is really where I grew up. And I just fell in love with stories and telling stories about companies and the people in them. My first job out of school was at a company called Roman Haas. I don't know if any of you are aware of it. It was headquartered at 6th and Market in Philadelphia. People always seem to remember that we owned Morton Salt. That's probably the only consumer product we made, but we made tons of things that go into everything, probably things that are in your room right now. And then in 2009, on April Fool's Day, Dow Chemical bought us. And I survived that transition for about 4 years. And if anyone's been through a corporate merger, it's a very unfun game of musical chairs. But they let me work from home and I grew a taste for that. I started doing some freelancing, realized I liked working with a diversity of clients, even though it's outside the chemical industry. Although I will say a lot of my clients, of course, because of my network, tend to be in the chemical industry, but I support even businesses that are adjacent to the chemical industry that we sell into, like healthcare. Johnson and Johnson as a client. I spilled coffee on the right person and landed an account with Disney. Highly recommend that. It can be very helpful. I nerded out and was just the right level of nerd and got some writing jobs there and some branding support for their vacation club, of which we became a member. So I really do drink the Kool-Aid. And even, career coaches I support. I have a woman that I've worked with who's launching a Shabbat in a Box company, which is very cool. So big, small, in between. I really enjoy the mix. And what I really do is help them tell the story that only they can tell. I think you'll find in most industries, if you look at your competitor websites, a lot of people are telling the same story. They're using the same language. I always think when I look at marketing, it's kind of like Mad Libs where they just kind of fill in, founded in year. We believe in customer service first, quality, like they are using the same language. And it's just a little bit it doesn't get in. And we're going to talk about why powerful language works. It's human to human speak. It doesn't need to be corporate corp. Human language really works because you're trying to convince another human being to reach out to you. So stories are really at the heart of that. Let me share my presentation and we can start going through it. John, can you shout out to me? I can't always see when someone's raising their hands. If someone has a
Sure.
question,
Yeah,
just shout
I'll
it
tell
out
you.
to me. Um,
Would you like us to ask questions as you go along or save them for the end?
yes, I'd like this to be very interactive. So if you have a question as I'm going, because you might not remember it, and I'm very sorry, I have the flu, so I'm not my usual sunshiny self, but I will do my best here. Let me see, where's the share button? I'm so used to
Should be
Teams.
down at the bottom.
Yep, I see it. All right, this should work. Is everybody seeing this?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Okay, so the couple of things we're going to go through here.
By
Oh,
the
go
way,
ahead.
I didn't mention to everyone, feel free to share your information in the chat box as well for everyone. So,
Okay, I'll do that at the very end. If I forget, remind me because my brain's fuzzy, but I will do that at the very end. Perfect, thank you. So the things we're going to go through today, why stories, why does stories matter? And then we're going to go through the genesis of how you can use that in your brand storytelling. So the first thing is your core brand story. It's the sort of a foundational house of how you talk about your company and your why, your how, and your what that you bring to all of your stakeholders and your customers. And then the next thing is, okay, you've got your foundational brand story house. How do you develop that with ongoing story sharing? And that's really the real world stories that bring your core brand story to life. So your foundational story sort of has a couple of elements in it that are key, and then you might pull on one or two of those in a story that shows, okay, here's how we do that in a real world scenario, whether it's talking about a particular client experience or talking about one of your team members or one of your services put into practical application. And then that also allows you to keep it going, because you can only tell your foundational story so many times. You want to keep that going to give yourself an opportunity to reach out to people. So we're going to talk about how you do that as well. And then the last one is, okay, that all sounds great. How do you make it happen and keep it going? All right. It is not advancing. There we go. All right. So why stories? And again, ask questions as you have them. This is meant to be interactive. Share great examples that you have, and just raise your hand. So why stories? I always ask people, have you ever been to a presentation where someone shared 100 slides, facts and figures, but what you take away is a great example or a great story they shared? One of the ones that I always share, and if I told this the last time before I had to bounce off, I'm sorry, I don't think I did. But again, I grew up in the chemical industry, and safety was, of course, like in most industries, but especially in industry like chemical industry, very important. And I'd been through, at that point in time, I think this was 5 years in my career, I'd been through ergonomics training, for every kind of training that you can imagine. But we were on the middle of a leadership call where there was the top 500 people in the company. I wasn't one of them for Roman Haas, but I helped facilitate this. And the president, in the middle of the call, told a story about how he had been traveling back to back, was exhausted, fell asleep at the wheel, and flipped the car. And this story was so harrowing. He talked about thinking about his kids, that whenever I feel that twinge, I pull over. It's just not worth it. And to me, that's always been a very powerful example, because what he did in telling that story changed behavior. And you really need to tell that story and have that emotional impact that only a story can do. I could have gone to 100 driving safety classes or read things, but when you hear that story, it changes behavior. So when you tell stories about your company, it's going to change behavior to get someone to say, wow, I really need to change this thing that I do in my business. I'm really struggling here. Let me pick up the phone and call. Those narratives that you share that show those real world examples, they are incredibly powerful. And that we're going to talk about why that is a little bit when we get to the why part of the discussion. But stories really help articulate that why in a very personal way. And they're a key driver in making decisions. So stories boost everything from engagement in your brand, memorability, like we talked about, they're going to remember it. Differentiation. My guess is if you tell a story, no one else in your competitive realm is going to tell the same story. That'd be
Right.
super weird. Humanization, it makes us feel connected. Trust, when they say, oh, wow, I see what they're doing for someone over here, it builds that trust. Simplicity, stories are really fantastic in that they can both they can add layers to your brand, but they also can get right to the heart of what you do. There's a great Google example that if I have some time, I'll show you, but it just gets right to the heart of what a brand can do for one person or a group of people. They can bring that simplicity to it. Um, they can help things resonate with you and say, oh, wow, I see me in that story. It's kind of hard to do that when you're not telling a story. If you're just reading like a Wikipedia definition. You feel in it when you see another person, another human being in it. Shareability. I think people are more likely to share a story than they are to say, "Hey, check out this brand messaging over here." But they're going to share a great story. So things
Mhm.
tend to go viral or be shared when you're sharing a really great story, or a great piece of advice or a market trend. Those things are infinitely more shareable than the posts that are just, hey, look at me. I'm great. My company's great. Those things tend not to get shared as much. You kind of want to back into those things with a great story. Stories have universal appeal. We've been telling them on Cave since forever. And stories can also give you a really powerful call to action. If you see what someone else did in a story and it was successful for them, it's going to make you feel like, okay, I'm going to take that similar path.
Yeah, I can give one example where I was doing a workshop years ago for a very large job search group where on the marketing message, on how do you tell your story in your elevator pitch, and I taught them a little technique. And then they said, "Oh, we're going to have everyone get up and give their pitch, and can you give them some feedback?" Well, there were 100 people in the room. I'm like, oh no, what did I get myself into? Out of all 100 30-second pitches. The one that really stood out for me was a person who got up and said how she had helped her boss earn their bonus that year. And I was like, wow, that's the person I would want to hire. And it actually changed the way I gave my elevator pitches from then on, that I'd always include a little case study.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I liked how you began today. It works. It
Yep.
just works because you're immediately engaged in the story. It doesn't have to be once upon a time to be a story. It's just something that connects you to something tangible and real that you can relate to. And it works every time. You think about the brands out there that when you want to watch the commercials, it's usually because they're telling a really great story. I mean, you go back many years ago and you think of those sappy but wonderful Campbell soup commercials. They were doing it before a lot of people were doing it, where they had the kid and the mom came in with the soup and it made you cry, and it was just kind of, it warmed you up on the inside and the out. It's just powerful. You are seeing a lot more companies do this. And do it quite well. I think there's still a lot of lag in spaces that aren't as obvious, like those big consumer brands. They're doing that pretty well. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. But it's the smaller companies that don't think that this could work for them. The ones that I think are funny are the ones where they say to me, "Listen, we're a commodity. People choose us based on price. It's always going to come down to facts and figures." Um, and again, I know, John, you've heard this story before. One of my favorite stories to tell when people start saying that like, no, people decide based on price or facts and figures. I always talk about Morton Salt, that early in my career, I sat in on focus groups, and like we would tell them that the salt that is in the store that has the cute little, everybody knows her, she's got the umbrella, when it rains it pours, our grandmother, like everybody knows her. And they put a lot of equity in that. We would tell them that the can of salt that isn't as adorable, that's sitting right next to it, that is 3 to 4 times cheaper, it's still made by Morton Salt, because Morton Salt makes most of the salt that's out there in the world globally. And they would be told this, and it was a high, like 95% would say, yeah, I'm still gonna go with the Morton Salt can because my grandmother used it. She's so cute and I trust it. And so there's a great example that they've told this story. It's a brand you trust. When it rains, it pours. She's cute. Guess what? All salt. When it rains, it pours these days, because they make it all. Um, and that's a really great example, because is there any more commodity that's more of a commodity than salt? It's literally salt. It's in the Bible. It's salt. But people are still willing to pay a premium for a brand that they feel emotionally connected to. So that to me is always the great example of that these stories, things that you are emotionally connected to, it matters. So what is a great story? It's got to have a personality. I will just a caveat here. I do think a lot of times people think that they need to be academic in their storytelling and write things and it sound like a white paper. And look, there is a time and a place for that kind of writing, 100%. But I would say in your marketing, I've yet to come across a company where when you're telling a story in places like LinkedIn or in person, that kitchen table speak doesn't work. Now, the personality might be on the fun scale very different. There might be more things you're trying to get across, but I would always encourage that part of that personality be accessible, be human, be kitchen table speak. It works in, I would say, every time, unless you need to be formal in writing a white paper, in which case then go write the white paper. But think about the personality when you sit down to write these stories. What are the words that you'd want someone to say when they walk away? Is it reassured? Is it a sense of fun? Is it a sense of excited about something? What's the feeling you want them to have? And then infuse that feeling in your storytelling. A story has to be simple. When you tell a story, you want to see this beautiful story arc. Jasmine could probably speak to this very well, that you want to see there's the hero of the story. And John, you mentioned that earlier. There's got to be a hero. Usually it's you or your company, your service, your product. There's a villain or a problem. There's a solution, and there's success. And what does that look like? That's why I get very mad at old movies, because at the end of an old movie, it's kind of like the end, like they solve it and then it's the end. And I like movies today because they give you a little bit to enjoy that. And I feel like good stories today, you want to see that lovely bell curve of problem, solution, and then we see them go off into the horizon. And what does that look like? What are the next steps look like? What's exciting? What's to come? It's got to be relevant to the audience. It has to connect with them. It has to speak to their pain points. So I always say, we're going to get to this later, know your audience. What are the things they're really struggling with? In some ways, you want to poke at that sore tooth. You really do, and say, like, are you struggling with this? And watch this person. They were really struggling with this, or this company was, oh my goodness, their sales were going down, or they were stagnant, or they were dealing with this culture issue in their company. Poke at that tooth, because it helps people go, yeah, my tooth hurts too. How did you fix it for them? So they can pick up the phone and call you, the dentist, right? And again, it's got to be human. It's got to use that kitchen table speak that we all connect with. Okay, so that's stories. Let's talk about your core brand story and how you build that, and why is the most important question to answer. So every business has a story to tell. Your story is the story that no one else in your industry can tell. It's not just because of the way you do your services, but the people in it. I mean, we're all flavored by the people that we're in. So you want to tell that personality and that story in a way that only you can tell. It shouldn't look like or sound like what other competitors are saying. Of course, there are going to be some similar notes, but the symphony of that story should sound different than anyone else's out there. It can tell the motivation for starting your business and why your team gets out of bed every day and you love why you do it, why your clients care, why they should trust you. A good brand story, like I said, it cuts through the same old blah, blah, and boilerplate. One of the things I see, and I'll point out here that I think you'll see now that I'm saying this, is everybody does their branding and they think, okay, I'm going to come up with the 3 words that best describe my company. We call it the triplet tagline, and you've seen them. It's 3 words. It's like integrity, value, customer service, whatever it is. And they go, done. Those are the 3 words that describe me. And I always think it's funny because who else did that? Enron. And one of their number one was integrity. So those 3 words, if they're not backed by anything. And listen, it doesn't mean that you can't use that. I recently did branding, and again, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm doing this. But there was a recovery home where we landed on healing hope home. Now, and then we backed it up. So it can work. I'm not saying it can't work, but I think often it's used as a checkbox. As we had my nephew's girlfriend design this logo, and we sat in a room and we came up with these 3 words. Done. And then they have the Wikipedia definition of their company that reads like it was pulled from Wikipedia, and that's what they're putting out there. That is what, in my experience, most companies are doing. They're also using stock photos a lot of times. So here's my PSA on stock photos. Conceptual ones can work, but when you're using stock photos of people that are not your own people, people can smell a stock photo, even a good one, from forever away, and it immediately distances you from people because it looks like stock. And when you're trying to build trust and you're using a stock, people with these shiny white teeth, and it's not a real client, don't do it. It's worth getting, even if it is your nephew's girlfriend photographer. It is so much better to have photos of real people, your real clients, your real team members, the real you. Use that on your website instead of stock photos. Sorry, I hate them just as much as I hate the triplet taglines. And that also will help you cut through the same old blah blah, because they're going to see pictures of human beings, and it matters.
So Danielle, David just put something in the chat box, which is like this, could be the start of a story. It says David Schramm, helping prevent a dystopian world for the insurance industry becoming a weapon of math destruction.
I love it. There you
Not
go. I
mass
couldn't think of a
destruction,
word.
math destruction, which is great. It ties on, it pulls on that actuarial background that he and I both have.
I love that. And again, it's different and people like that. It gets their attention. They're going to remember something like that. It matters. There was
Well, I think another good example, excuse me for interrupting, is
not at all.
John. John has a photo on his website or LinkedIn page, I forget which. That's a takeoff from the Abbey Road photo with the Beatles
Oh,
walking across
that's
the street in
kind of
Somerville.
that.
And I just noticed it, and it's unique, it's original. So it goes to exactly what you're saying, you know. And when I saw that, I was like, I actually called the photographer. I'm going to do something similar. It catches your attention, right? It really does resonate.
Yeah,
It really
I
and
think
does.
that's a great example.
and
John
that
had
was
actually done that.
Irina's idea. She said, "Okay, try walking across the street." And I'm like, "Oh, this is kind of silly." And then I looked at it, I go, "Oh, I like that so much."
I think that's a great example of exactly what you're talking about.
Yep. It's 100%.
It really
It,
resonated
people
with
will
me. I
remember it.
noticed it
And
immediately.
personality to it naturally. It makes you go, I want to talk to that guy. The person who did that. We picked our wedding photographer because he took out an ad in Philadelphia Magazine, which is not cheap, and he picked a picture of the ring bearer sitting and being like hysterically crying. And it's adorable and hilarious. And I said, whoever picked that as what he spent his money on as the photograph that he wanted to put forth, that's who I want being my wedding photographer. So it's memorable. It's just something a little bit different. Is something like that going to work for everyone? No, but it's going to work way better than the boring blah blah. Another example that is one of my favorites from recent years is there was a building and construction company, real down to earth people up in New England, and they had sat in that room and come up with this thing, and they were sort of marinating in the brilliance of it. I think it was the CEO's idea, and their new tagline was the relentless pursuit of excellence. And he was making all of their salespeople sign their emails relentlessly yours, which I think is a little stalkery. But they didn't talk like that. They were making fun of it, the sales team. Even clients were like, that's ridiculous. I mean, these were down to earth people. These are construction folks. So it didn't really work for them as much as the CEO loved the idea. And we did a brand story session. And at the end of the session, we got great ingredients. I mean, we were cooking. We had some good stuff for me to put together something for them. At the end, the guy sat back in his chair, the guy who actually had started the company, leaned back, went like this, and he said, at the end of the day, just damn good builders. And that's their tagline. We're damn good builders because they are, and they say it all the time, and it's wonderful. It's them. It feels right. I'm not saying curse in your brand story, but for them, it worked. And that's what you want. You want something that feels like you. I think there's a lot of agencies out there that come in and they say, all right, let me go through my drawer, try on this red dress for size. You don't want that. It's got to be something that's very custom to you. It's got to feel like you. That's why when I do a brand story session, I say it shouldn't just be one person at the table, unless it is a one person company or one or two person company. You want a cross section there. Often we want to hear from your clients as well, like what's their version of your story out there. What do they feel you do for them? Because you're not the only one who owns your brand; they own it too. Because what they're saying is the other side of the story. And then you have a brand story that really reflects something that is what you're doing out there. Okay, so the last thing on here is it answers the most important question. Why do we exist and why should you care? I don't know why it doesn't
I'd
exist.
say that last part is absolutely the most important. Why should we care?
Yes, yes.
And most businesses miss that.
They go right to what?
Yep.
So I think I might have asked this before, John. I know you've heard this question. I think you said yes. Has anyone seen the Simon Sinek TED Talk on the power of why? Anyone?
I can't. The
Sorry.
participant list is not showing the. So just say yes if you did.
Anyone seen it?
Yes.
All right,
I've
good.
read part of the book. I haven't seen the TED Talk, but I have read part of that book.
You read part of the book. Okay, so a couple people, but not everybody. So quick refresher for those who've seen it. I recommend it highly. It's worth, I think it's 17 minutes. It's a wonderful use of 17 minutes of your time. He nerds out over Apple. I nerd out over Google. So whatever you, and Disney as well. So although not necessarily lately, but I still nerd out over Google. It's the whole point is that when most, like what John said, when most people think about their brand narrative, they go right to what's easy, the Wikipedia definition, the what definition. What is it that we do? Here's our law firm. We are headquartered in New Jersey. These are the services we provide. And then sometimes they get into a little bit of the how, how they go to bat harder for you, what the services are. So a little bit of that competitive differentiating statement. And then there's the call to action, call us. That's how I would say, from my experience, 95 to 99% of companies do this. But the problem is the what and the how, they don't get at that emotional level. They don't inspire action like that driving safety story that I told you about. Facts and figures, they make sense to us, but they don't drive us to change behavior. And that's a problem. So what Simon Sinek says is to start with your why. So the interesting thing that he talks about, and he gets into the brain chemistry of this, is that the part of the brain that makes decisions, that actually drives action, has no capacity for language or math or any of that stuff. We think we make decisions based on rational thinking. We do not. We make decisions based on emotion all the time. Because when you light up the emotional part of the brain, it's the same part that lights up when you decide to do or to not do something. That's why when you're trying to get somebody to pick up the phone and call you or your company, there has to be that emotional connection. So brand stories that touch on that get into that passionate why does this matter? Brands that poke at that tooth and say, here's how we fix it and why it matters and why it's wonderful. Those are the ones that get people to pick up the phone, or even better, it gets people to be drinking, your Kool-Aid and think, oh my goodness, this company did this. It's not just a customer that you're getting a loyal customer, and they are the best brand ambassadors that you can have because they're telling people why you're wonderful and what you did for them. So when you think about your brand, you want to start with your why. And that's hard. It's very hard to articulate that in a concise way. But I have found when you get people in a room, they just light up. There's a company, I don't know that I have this example on here. I don't think I did. Just take a look. No, I don't. There's a company that does healthcare compliance solutions for hospitals. They basically help them figure out where are the holes in your financial processes, because the insurance companies sometimes try to skirt that, and there's often millions of dollars being left on the table. And this company's brand story read like an SAT paragraph. They were using words that I had never even heard, and it was awful. You couldn't even get through this paragraph. And I asked them, when you're using these words, like, do your clients know what those things mean? And they say, well, they do when we explain it to them. So, and I thought this is going to be tough to get these very technical people in a room and get that out of them. But the interesting thing is when I sat down with them, they were so passionate about what they did, because when I asked them the why question, I could have just recorded it and used it. I said, why do you do what you do? At the end of the day, why do you love what you do? And this one guy said, he says, we help save lives. He says, because we come into these hospitals, we help them figure out how can they get additional income. And it's not from the patients, again, it's from the insurance companies. And he says, one hospital built the next pediatric cancer wing because they had all this money. One company built or was able to buy this piece of digital imaging equipment that's catching things 10 times earlier. He says, so we helped that happen. And I love that story. It reminds me of, I'm going to butcher this, but it's an old tale, and it's ever so slightly religious, but not too much, where this guy comes into a town and he sees this guy and he's laying bricks and he says, what are you doing? And the guy says, I'm building a wall. And he asks someone else, so what are you doing? And he says, I'm putting together these pieces for the roof. And there's a woman sweeping the floor. And he says to her, well, what are you doing? And she says, I'm building a temple to God. And she understands the bigger thing here. So, what is that bigger thing that you make possible? And it's okay if it's a couple of steps down. If you're part of what makes that story happen, as a career coach, it's not just finding the job, it's the life that you want for yourself and for your family. It's more than just the one thing that it's more than just making the tooth feel better. it's a better quality of life, it's a better company, it's happier employees, whatever it is. It's so much more than that. So when you speak to those things that you ultimately enable, the temple or whatever it is that you're building, it's so powerful for people. So that list of things that they had in that paragraph just wasn't working for them. So when they started talking about that, we go to bat for you to help you find more of your dollars so that you can do more for the people that you serve, that was so much more powerful.
Yeah, I remember one time coming across an example from of an executive assistant being asked what she did, and her answer was that I help I help sweep away the work gremlins so my boss can climb mountains.
Love that. Yep. Yep. And it helps you feel good about what you do. I think this not only helps when you do a brand story well, it not only helps your clients and your customers understand you, it helps your team members feel really awesome about what they do, the team that they're a part of. So that's powerful as well. I mean, big companies, small companies, it's great. Like, that's why I love having these brand story sessions, because it just, everybody feels so jazzed leaving. Like, you just are like, wow, I really do like what I do. And it's fantastic. Although I will say the best answer I ever got when I said, why do you get out of bed every day? And I don't phrase it that way anymore, because a woman goes, oh, my bladder. So I had to start rephrasing that question. So, but it is lovely for people to realize why they're passionate about what they do, that you have a unique story to tell, and then to start telling it. So how do you do it? And again, there's so many different ways to do this. I know a lot of different companies do brand stories different ways. I always say you need to really think about understanding your clients. Who are they? Are there different segments? What do they value? What are their needs? What are their pain points and challenges that they're facing? What are some of the stories you've heard? So really having a rock solid sense of that. And it is surprising to me how often companies can't articulate that super well. That's key, is having that done. It's kind of that marketing 101. But when you're rolling and you're in the day-to-day business, sometimes where you started, your client base has grown. You've grown into different segments. Sometimes there's a segment you may want to get into that you haven't yet tapped this market, and it could be a powerful market to tap. So that's a really important thing to think about when you think about your brand story. What's the call to action? What action do you want them to take? What are the alternatives to the desired action? Because you might want to kind of take a not a knock, but you might want to take a knock at those in your thing. Like, maybe the alternatives is doing nothing, stay still. Maybe it's a competitor. Maybe it's doing it in-house and they're really struggling with doing that. What are the barriers to action? What's keeping them from doing it? And the reward statement, and this is probably the most important. What are the tangible rewards of working with you, and what are the intangible rewards? And this, again, kind of circles back to that why statement. It's just a little bit different way of asking it. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are some of the questions that I ask in a brand story. It's never a straight path, so sometimes I go off on different areas depending on the unique needs of a company, but this is a really good starting list. And John, I can make this presentation available and you guys can take a peek at it if you're able to email it out. And there's lots on, if you Google this, what are some questions to ask? There's huge lists of questions you can ask to guide that. And I find having someone in the room who can help get people out of the weeds or get them in the right weeds is really important, because I have learned, when you've been doing this for a long time, your brain starts to ding, 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 ding. When you're hearing something, it's like, tell me more about that. Give me an example of that. But then when this is probably not something we're going to use, and you can redirect. So it is good to have a facilitator in the room. I mean, some companies have done an excellent job of it themselves, but I find a facilitator does help guide the conversation into places that are really going to help you have a narrative that's powerful. Okay, so once you have that foundational story, how do you keep it alive? How do you keep it going? So that's really just developing stories. And I find the hardest part of this is just kind of sitting down and getting started. People don't often know where to get started. So the stories, of course, should align with key themes in your core brand story. I would have a list of those and have them up in your office. And some people call them core values. I hate the term core values. But to me, it's more like, what are the things you care about the most? That's another pet peeve of mine, is core values, because I feel like people love having the mission, vision, core values. And listen, I think it's fine to have them. It's fine internally. But if you ever called a company and said, try and decide between A and B, tell me about your core values. That has happened 0 times. And people are all big on these core values. Just tell me what you care about. It's the same thing, just packaged in a more human way, not the corporate speak. My favorite was a company who called them strategic thrusts. It's terrible. But people get very corporate in this. You don't need to be, you don't need a mission. Just what do you care about? What do you stand for? What matters to you? Talk about that. Put that up on your wall, because that should inform what kind of stories you're going to tell. If trust is a big thing, if problem solving is a big thing, put those up on your walls, because it's going to jog ideas. Consider story sharing possibilities in some of your key commitments, whether it's diversity, safety, sustainability, whatever it is, put those in there as well. Stories can be anything from a success story. Tell a story of what you did for a client. Thought leadership pieces. It could be maybe talking about a trend in the industry that's really cool. It could be an employee or a team spotlight that talks about what they bring to the company. And the cool thing about this, people always think that success stories need to be these big, stick the landing, Mary Lou Retton, I'm dating myself here, but like, hurrah, it's done. It doesn't have to be. It can be a little win or a small part of a big story. Like maybe it's, you did this big thing for a company, but there was one part of it, a collaboration that happened or a aha moment. Just write the story about that. I'm not saying you can't do the big ones, but they can be little ones too, because sometimes those are even more accessible. And I find companies really struggle with this, is they're like, we're not ready to talk about this yet. And there are reasons sometimes you can't share a client story for confidentiality reasons, but you might be able to share a small part of it. Here's a cool example of that. So I'm doing work, like I said, for Johnson & Johnson. And I work for a group called Customer Experience Engineering, where they find these problems that are long, like they've been happening for a very long time. And these engineers go in and apply an engineering mindset to solve the problem. They find the root cause and they fix it. And this might have been happening for years. Small things, like only 0.001 it's happening in the market, but it's not good enough. They want to be at 100%. They want all their numbers to be stellar. So, but when they talk about these problems, they can't really say the product. So they had an issue where there was some foreign matter on, I don't know if it was contact lenses or what, but we couldn't use the word contact lens in the story. But the interesting part of the story was that the problem was unreported. People thought it was user error and they would switch brands. So it was talking about, how do we find out unreported problems? How do we try to solve those? The whole article never used the word contact lens. It was kind of like playing the game taboo. So you can tell a story that's more conceptual, but not necessarily ever mention a client. Because I find a lot of times people are like, well, I can't talk about my clients. I can't use their name. I can't mention the company. There are other ways to do that that are more creative, that get to the heart of the story. So that's a great example of, like, we told a story about foreign matter and contact lenses, but yet never used either of those words, but still got the point across that this is important. This is how we find unreported problems, and this is how we solve them. So here's another example of that. There's a company that does, I forget what they basically help healthcare companies figure out how to be in compliance with all the rules and regulations of reporting spend on doctors, so that they're not like bribing people. So this company comes in and helps them do all the reporting. And there were 2 doctors that had the same name, and it was sending them in a tailspin. And they talk about how they're so like type A that they can figure out these problems. So we wrote this like a Sherlock Holmes case, the curious case of the 2 doctors. It was a lot of fun. It's better than reading those things. It's like, we are, what problem solving is in our DNA, blah, 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 blah. And just reading the story we've read from other companies. There's better ways to do that. Same thing with safety in the chemical industry. So many of my safety companies, safety is our top priority. Yeah, it should be, of course. That's a price to play. Don't give me price to plays. Tell me what you're doing that's specific. Tell me about a near miss you had and what you did. Tell me about a safety program you implement. Tell me about a safety star on your team and what they're doing to get everybody feeling really excited about safety. That matters more than the whole safety is our top priority. It's in our core values. Tell me more, make it real. Here's another example of that. So many companies go out with all these celebrations. Obviously, International Women and Girls in Science Day is big in the chemical industry, and they put these LinkedIn posts out that's like, celebrating women and girls in science day to all, it's like, that's great. I'm glad you're doing that. but tell me a story about a real person on your team. It makes so much more of a difference. It's not just checking a box. You're telling a story. It's also a recognition tool for someone on your team or a client you have or a connection in your circle. Tell stories. Stories work in almost everything you're trying to convey. All right, last thing here, making it happen and keeping it going. So for your brand story development, people a lot of times will do the brand story, and I can't tell you how many of them get the report, think it's wonderful, and then don't do anything with it. Use it. Put it up on your website, put it in your sales tools, use it in in-person conversations. It always surprises me when people will spend the money but then not see it over, and I'd say that's half. So if you spend the money to do it, you take the time to do it, use it. Encourage your team to use it. Keep it alive. It's a living thing. Ongoing story development. If you do have a team of people, build a culture of story sharing. Talk to them about like, hey, keep a notebook, jot down interesting things that happen. If you read an interesting article, let's share it on our LinkedIn post. Because you think it and then you forget it. Life gets busy and you forget it. So I always have on my phone here, and mine's just the notes tool, is jotting down something that like, oh, that's a cool idea for that client or for myself. Jot it down and encourage your team to do that. Have a place where people can send story ideas so that you can keep those going. It does start with the leadership of the company. When they see you doing it, they're going to want to do it. Make it easy to share stories. Reward people who share stories. Give them ideas. It's this month, it's safety month, or it's career month, or whatever it is. Give them prompts to do it. Leverage stories across channels. When you've got one story, you can use it in lots of different ways. Put it on LinkedIn, put it on a blog, send an e-blast out. So that's, you get more bang for the buck for each story. Keep an eye on metrics so you know which ones, like, oh my goodness, people really loved that story. There's a company that I support called Monument Chemical, and they did a bunch of cool things in the year, but their number one story was about a guy who ran the Boston Marathon. Everybody read that story. And we did tie the story to perseverance and agility and all those things that they do, but that was their number one read story, which reminds me of the Mary Poppins thing, Spoonful of Sugar. We are kindergartners at heart. We love pictures. We love stories of people. It gets them in. So don't forget that spoonful of sugar. It kind of goes with the storytelling thing. And then keep it going. Have a content calendar. Hold yourself accountable to it. This stuff really works. I know Kim can speak to that as well. You got to keep that wheel turning. But the good thing is once you've kind of gotten that muscle going, kind of like going to the gym or exercising, it becomes second nature to think that way. And it's really powerful. All right, that's it. That was a lot of me talking. Any questions? Hopefully this got you very excited about story sharing.
Yeah, if you stop sharing, I think then you'll be able to see everyone again.
Yeah, we hit that. Hold on, stop share. Did
There.
that work?
And
there we go.
So what questions do people have for Danielle?
So I have a question. It's kind of a general question. I love the storytelling idea, and it's something I've tried to work on with my clients, telling them kind of success stories that I've had with my clients. Is there any guideline in terms of, I'm always thinking in terms of like John does the 30-second intro. You said precise. I think concise is also a word I would use when you're telling stories or whatever you're saying. Simple, less is more, simple is good. Do you have any guidelines in terms of, how long the story should be, because I find the other thing I've learned is, people have the attention span of a gnat. And if you go into too much detail or go too long, you just lose people.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
So I do. So there's lots of people who are always trying to convince me that you have to be super short with things. And I think it depends. I think there's a mix. So there's one leader that I work for at Johnson & Johnson. I do all of his ghostwriting for his website. And we do a mix of short form posts that are real short and punchy. We do videos and we do longer form articles. Interestingly enough, he gets the most hit on his long form articles, the ones that are 1,500 words. Now listen, they are skimmable. They are kitchen table speak. They are fun reads and interesting reads. I think you need a mix because everybody's different. It is not true that people are not reading full things. If that's the case, people would never read a full CNN article. You want things to be skimmable. You want things to be as concise as you can get them, but sometimes you need a little more room to give a full thing. A thought leadership piece in particular needs to have some heft to it. Some people's perceptions of articles that are super short is that they're not helpful. But like a LinkedIn post, you kind of want to keep that short and punchy. Sometimes a video may be a better format. Sometimes it's not a story at all. It's an infographic, a really cool infographic. So it really depends on the content. And I always say a mix. You want a mix of things for different audiences, and it depends on the content. And Kim might be able to weigh in on this as well, with having that expertise on social channels. But to me, I always feel like a mix, short, long, but always punchy and concise, skimmable. You want people to, instead of messing around on Facebook or doing whatever they do when they drink their coffee in the morning, you want them to spend time with you. So to me, it's that spoonful of sugar. It's got to be similar to the content they're reading in other places. Enjoyable.
And I like to think of kind of reusability, that I might have this long a story that I use in a certain venue, but I've got different elements that I pull out depending on where I am or who I'm talking to. Sometimes it's just one line from a story.
Yep. And sometimes a video vignette adds some flavor to it. There's different ways to bring it across, and I love that mix, because I think you're going to get all different kinds of people, and it gives you more opportunities to try different things. But I always disagree with people when they say people don't read anything. Yes, we have short attention spans, but when you grab them with something that's interesting, I can't tell you how many long articles that I've read that just completely resonate with me that I have bookmarked because I liked the article so much. So people do still read things. It just has to resonate with them.
I know I certainly do, so that makes sense to me.
Has to grab their attention right away so that they want to read more.
Absolutely. Yeah, you want them to be engaged with it. I mean, my son's 13, and people are like, oh, kids don't, and he was a tough, this is not quite related, but he was a tough reader. He wouldn't read anything, and it was like, oh my God, I was such a reader. Well, I was reading this book and I thought, oh my goodness, it was a little young adult, but it's like, he's gonna love this. Well, he's on book 4. It's just finding the right thing that resonates with that audience. And because we are still hungry to read and digest things in different format. It doesn't all have to be video. It doesn't all have to be short, punchy. We don't always have to play name that tune to get it down to 2 notes. We don't. Sometimes you have room to breathe if it's the right content.
Well, remember the Harry Potter books? It got longer and longer and longer. I mean, my son was not reading really anymore, and then my brother gave him the first Harry Potter when they came out, and he absorbed it, and suddenly he was reading everything, fantasy and so on. But those were huge, and kids were like, rushing to try to read them before everyone else read them.
Yep. So I always challenge it. I hear a lot of clients today say, oh, this post is, it should be just one sentence. No, it depends. Sometimes one sentence works. Sometimes a picture works. Sometimes you need 2,000 words to get through a thought leadership piece. But just always readable, always snackable. That's my favorite word, snackable. It really should always kind of feel snackable, like you can digest it easily. But yeah, I challenge that all the time because I hear that a lot, that people don't read things. Yes, they do. Of course they do. If people didn't read things, people wouldn't be publishing stuff. You wouldn't be seeing these long articles on LinkedIn. They're reading them. It just has to resonate with your audience.
So we've hit the 9 o'clock hour. If anyone wants to talk about this further with you, is the best thing, should they connect with you on LinkedIn? Should they check out your company? What's the best way?
So I put my email on here. I'm going to put my phone number on here.
Yeah. And I'll put that in a write-up on the meeting. I'll put what you put in the chat box.
Perfect. And I'll also send you the presentation as well, so you can send everything to everybody.
Great.
But I'm always happy to chat. Stories are my favorite. So if you want to talk about that, or a challenge you're facing, a market you're trying to reach, I'm always happy to help.
So David raised a question here.
Yeah, I had a longer question and I quickly typed it in the chat. Is that okay to borrow a story from a book or from something else? Because my company is so new that I don't have clients and story to really tell. So mine are more aspirational. So is that okay to use?
I think a brand story can be aspirational. I don't know that I don't know if you're asking like to kind of cut and paste another company's brand story, but
No.
you can use other inspiration as long as you are crediting it as such. But yeah, I mean, brand stories absolutely can be aspirational. And I think sometimes it can be powerful. A great example of that is when Domino's Pizza came out with their commercials that was like, yeah, we know our pizza sucks, like we're fixing it. And then they came out with a commercial. It's like, our pizza used to suck. It doesn't now. So things, I still not my favorite, but it is better than it was. But a brand story can absolutely have aspirational parts of it. I see a lot of companies talking about green chemistry as an example as to where the market's going and how they're trying to get there. They're not there yet, but that's okay. It's part of where they're trying to get to. So yes, it can be aspirational. Yes, you can use pieces as long as you're crediting them. But I'm sure you still have a brand story as to why you started doing what you do that you can tell, and then talk about, well, where are we going? Where am I growing to? And how am I going to help you grow there with me?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I think we've run out of time. The number of people have had to drop off, but this was great. Thanks so much for joining us, Danielle.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will share with you the link also. I'm going to take the recording, I'll put it up on my YouTube channel and share the link with you and everyone here. And thanks so much.
All right, thank you. Bye, everybody.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Okay.